And we will have a roll call by our city manager, Melinda Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor Slawick. Councilmember Judeman?
Here.
Councilmember Smith? Councilmember Abrams? Here. Councilmember Zhang?
Here.
And Mayor Slawick?
Here.
Thank you.
Approval of agenda. It's been moved by Abrams and seconded by Smith. Approval of agenda. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hearing ayes, all, the agenda is approved. We have no unfinished business. Really, we just have one item of new business tonight, and that is the North End Study Update Presentation and Discussion. So excited about this. I know the committee's had one meeting, and City Manager Coleman, do you want to tee it up?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Slawick, members of the City Council. You remember in our draft 2040 comprehensive plan, the north end, the area around the mall, was identified as an area that needed additional study and analysis and visioning because of its importance to our community. So to that end, we hired Perkins and Will to conduct a planning process that's focused on that north end, and we do have a steering committee that is meeting monthly. They had one meeting in October, and will be having their second meeting on Wednesday of this week. And I will let Mr. Martin give you a little bit more about this, but also Jay Dema from Perkins and Will be giving you an update in the presentation this evening.
Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As Manager Coleman mentioned, out of the 2040 comprehensive plan, we identified the North End as an area that needed further studying, and we took that time after the comprehensive plan was largely wrapped up to then step right into that project and hired Perkins and Will to come on board to assist the city in developing that vision. As we know, the Maplewood Mall on the east side of this study area and the St. John's Hospital on the west side are important entities and anchor this neighborhood, and as well with the BRT Rush Line project being planned, we knew that this was a good time to get ahead of the projects that are already being implemented, the landscape of retail changing. So this is a good opportunity for the city to get ahead of that, get its vision in place, and then when these projects and other elements start changing in this neighborhood, we know where we want to go with that. So as far as what we've done so far and where we're going for next steps, Mr. Dema on behalf of Perkins and Will is here with his presentation, and we can just dive right in to get an update on the project.
Sounds great. Thank you. Welcome to the City Council.
Yes. Mayor, members of the council, it's good to be back in front of you tonight. And as we know, I'm going to try to provide sort of an update of where we are with the North End Vision Plan, and obviously have a discussion or answer any questions that you folks might have. So just to pull up the presentation. So just a quick overview. I'll go over some of the basics about what the plan is, where we're looking at specifically, why we're doing it, how we're going about that process, and specifics on the schedule, so you have an understanding of when this is all occurring. I'll also touch on some background research that we've been doing in the very early phases of the project as well, and then go over some feedback that we've received to date on various community engagement activities that we've been doing, and then talk about the next steps that's with this project. So I think according to our schedule, we will be in front of the council at least 2, maybe 3 times throughout the whole process. So this is really the first time we're actually in front of the council formally. So what are we talking about? What is the North End Vision Plan? Well, in essence, it's a shared community vision, and it addresses several things. Because we're talking about a developed mixture of uses in an area with commercial, institutional, residential. We're looking at short and long-term opportunities for new development in this area. We are also trying to address new or improved connections between land uses within this area as well. We are also addressing new or improved public spaces that could be enhancing the sort of the public realm and create potential additional amenity to draw people into the area. And we are also addressing priorities for new investment because the plan will be looking out well into the future, but at the same time, there's clearly issues related to what is low-hanging fruit versus what is the more aspirational vision that you want to keep that in mind. So.
So, I looked at that picture many times, trying to figure out what that was, and some of those, I think, is shared humidity.
Yes, that is another another way to think of that. It's really about obviously people coming together and really having to work together to realize a vision ultimately. So yeah. I believe that the history behind this image is, I think it's in Spain and parts of Europe, that this sort of building towers of humans is like a really kind of, it's a competitive thing. And they get these festivals that happen, and you can see just really how tall these towers actually get. So it's a little... So that's the what. So let me go over on where exactly we're talking about when we talk about the North End in that study area. It's not a really hard and fast. We're not talking about very, very clearly defined boundaries, but generally speaking, we're looking at I-694 in the north, which is probably, if there is a very hard boundary, that's probably the closest because it's a very big physical and psychological barrier, and it also separates Maplewood from White Bear Lake. But on the east, there's White Bear Avenue, but we also have commercial properties on both the east and west side of White Bear Avenue. So, it's not exactly the road itself. Similar with Beam Avenue on the south. And then on the west side, there's Bruce Vento Trail. But, again, understanding that, there's certain influences that could impact what's happening to the study area that are maybe just beyond what has been kind of generally defined as the study area. We're flexible in understanding that as we go through this process. If we understand that there's something nearby that's a big influencer, we would certainly incorporate that and somehow account for it in the planning process. Some facts here, just to kind of underscore, again, the importance of doing the work. We have two very big anchors, the Maplewood Mall and St. John's Hospital. When you add up all of the retail square footage, not only in the mall, but all the surrounding sort of satellite retail spaces, we're talking about over 2 million square feet of retail space. So it's a very, very significant concentration of retail space. It's one of 13 or 14 fairly kind of significant retail concentrations throughout the metro area. Almost 1 million square feet of healthcare space. That's the hospital and all the supporting and ancillary medical office buildings. When you add up those jobs, it's somewhere around 5,000 jobs in the study area. When you go out just another mile, we're also looking at another 10,000 jobs. So it anchors not only the strong jobs within the study area, but it's also an anchor that is just a job center within the entire region. When you break down those jobs, a little over half of them do fall in retail, not understandable, or understandable given the amount of retail in this area. And 40%, 4 out of 10, are healthcare jobs. So the by and large, most of the jobs fall into either the retail or the healthcare sectors. Now, that's just within the study area. I think if we broaden that out a little bit, you'd see a lot more employment diversity. At the same time, there's 1,000 households. We talk about these two big anchors, and sometimes we forget that the northwestern portion of the study area is a pretty important residential neighborhood for the community. And when we kind of think about the neighborhoods that are adjacent to this area, and we add up all those households, we're looking at close to another 6,000 more households just within a mile. So it serves an important, not only a regional shopping and healthcare destination, but also serves these households that are nearby. Those are important things to understand. So that's the where. Why? Just to reiterate real quickly, it was identified in the 2040 comp plan. This is an important area. We want to look at it. So now we're diving a little bit deeper than what a comp plan would do. We also, the Rush Line BRT planning is kind of going through its process. So it's really important to coordinate with the work that the county and Metro Transit and other partners are doing. They're looking specifically at two potential stations within the study area and the important ways that the area around those stations sort of evolve for purposes of, sort of supporting that investment and to coordinate that with sort of the broader study area planning here for the North End is really important. As noted before, retail is one of these big anchors. It is a changing sector, real estate sector. We have a factoid here, nearly 10% of all retail sales occur online. That's, 2.5 times what it was 10 years or so ago. So this transition into more online retail is certainly having an impact on a lot of our existing bricks and mortar, and kind of understand that dynamic. So we want to understand how to protect a key asset. We've been hearing from a lot of folks how important the mall and the retail destination is. People are certainly very concerned about its future because it does play an important role. Healthcare being a key anchor in the area, and as a sector, it's evolving. It's, according to the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, healthcare in the metro area, it's going to be the largest and fastest growing job sector through the early 2000s. So, it's looking at that and how important that job sector is today and how it's going to be in the future is how can we build on that key asset. So that's another important why. And I want to kind of roll back a little bit. Before we actually got into the formal planning process, there was a market study that was done, and I sort of provided some of the key summary points of that to the council over the summer. And one of the big points that comes out of that is that housing is a very, very big issue. We're in a particular environment right now with a lot of rising prices, many times due to just an acute lack of supply that's available, that's out there. And so I think looking at the relationship between the traditional anchors of retail, other commercial, institutional, along with housing is really, really important. So we want to understand that. The why, the how. We've really, the early phases of this was analyzing existing conditions, because in any planning process, if you want to look toward the future, you really do have to understand where you are today. And so we did the market study. There's also a number of other sort of data that was gathered, and we mapped certain important physical situations, and I'll go over that real briefly here in a moment. And then we informed and educated ourselves about the previous planning work and studies that have been done in this area in order to sort of bring forward those important findings and or recommendations from the previous work. And we've been going through a fairly robust process of gathering input from a variety of different stakeholders in the study area, and as well as folks who are maybe not located in the study area but have an important investment in the study area themselves. So in addition to, of course, getting in front of councils and committees like yourself here at the city, we've been doing open houses. We've set up a project website, and we have different social media and other portals on that website to engage folks on. We've been doing targeted outreach to particular stakeholders, reaching out to the hospital, some of the apartment areas as well, attending events as necessary throughout this planning process to have a presence there. And there is a As you know, there is a working group that's been set up that is representative of a number of different stakeholders that we are now meeting with roughly on a monthly basis to really guide and steer this process. So there's part of this whole process of gathering input. And, once we get to a point where we've gathered enough input, and to be honest, the input gathering is a process that goes throughout the entire process. We don't do it for a finite period of time, but after a certain point, we do take a lot of those ideas and we really start to test those ideas for change. As the consultant team and our other partners working, we really start to draft up some alternatives and some concepts, and then we bring them back to the stakeholders in all these different ways and say, hey, does this match up and meet the vision for this area? And then we make refinements accordingly. What we do to help kind of bolster that at the end of the day, part of our scope here is to actually create design guidelines that would reinforce the vision. So it's creating recommendations for you folks to ultimately turn into some policy that can help, really kind of strengthen that vision. And there ultimately then, there is an action plan as part of our scope as well. So not only do we hopefully create and illustrate a vision that people can get behind, but really lay out the steps that can happen both in the short term, midterm, and long term that need to happen, and what are some of the barriers and challenges associated with those, so that when we move in from planning into actually implementation, folks can have a pretty good sense of where they need to go next. So that's the how. Any questions on that at all at this point? Okay. Okay, this is another piece of the how, so that folks can kind of understand just how exactly our decision's going to be made as part of the planning process. As I mentioned before, at the heart of this is a working group. There's 27 people that make up that working group. So there's members on the council like yourselves, other commissions and committees at the city. But then we have a number of residents that are represented on that. We have a bunch of different businesses on there. Both the mall and the hospital are actually represented on that working group as well. So, and as you can see here, that ultimately the decision-making authority lies with the council in adopting the plan. But this is all done, of course, in the context of the community's broader input. So,
I think one question, probably for Mr. Martin, is we would want to, I think you just sent out a reminder, but we'd want to try to make sure both that someone from St. John's and someone from the mall are there. I know, I just sent the St. John's a text, that person, to see but have they RSVP'd? Are you taking RSVPs or just asking for no's? Because it makes a big, without those two there's a lot of questions we can't answer as well.
Mayor and council, so when this project started, the council did approve the North End Working Group, and both entities are on that list. And we send the invitations out, and Laura Keitinger and her, she has another counterpart that's serving as kind of an alternate, and they've committed that they would be at said meetings. The mall manager for at least tomorrow's meeting has not confirmed either way. So we'll put up another connection out there, communication encouraging them to attend. But at the end of the day, you have to have willing people to come to said meetings.
Right, and sometimes, so I just texted her. I'll text Jennifer, but I know she spends part of her time out of state as well now, so
Sure.
it could be difficult, but okay.
Yep.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is. It's an obvious a challenge with respect to reaching out to the mall management and ownership. I know there's been times where in the past we've reached out to them and they've been more one-on-one arrangements. So if they're not willing and or able to participate in more of a group setting, there's, I think, certainly strategies we could do to be reaching out to them one-on-one.
My sense is everybody wants to be there. It's just a time thing,
Yeah.
right? If they're not either in the state or they have a direct conflict with another meeting. So I think it's just, but we'll just shore it up here and, everybody likes to be reminded 10 times, right? Yes, so, thank you.
And then finally, as far as this, what, where, when, and it's the when. So as you can see in this sort of Gantt chart, we've laid out the various phases of the project. So we had this early sort of what we call discovery phase, which is about the fact-finding, get us up to speed on the background issues and information. We're pretty much done with that process at this point, and now we're transitioning into the actual sort of getting together the framework of the vision, the plan itself, but we're very, very early in that process. And that's going to continue on through into spring, early spring. And then that we will, after we have gone through these iterations of this plan vision, we will get into working on implementation strategies into the heart of spring. So we hope to wrap this all up by the end of April or beginning of May. So keep the whole process to a fairly tight, and there's some advantages to that in terms of when we're working, particularly with the working group, we can really build on kind of the momentum and folks that are excited so we don't drag this out too long. And we really kind of push that forward. So that's kind of the goal, to, given the timeline that we've set up for this process. Background research. Okay, so before I jump in this, I mentioned you the market study, and that was a real key part of the work that's been done to kind of really lay the foundation for a lot of the knowledge and understanding and some of the dynamics at play. I'm not going to go over that because I did sort of present that to you folks over the summer, but I do want to talk about some other things that we have been doing, and kind of hinted at this a couple moments ago about some sort of physical characteristics of the study area that we've been mapping. I don't want to walk through each one of these because I think that would get a little belabored, but I just want to highlight the types of information that we've been looking at, and that's all uploaded and provided on the project website at this point. So these little thumbnails, I guess, is probably the way they look more than anything. They're the exact same piece of geography that we're looking at. But you can see the different types of information that are being analyzed. So looking at the amount of impervious surface, that's what the rainwater can't go through. And you can see, for example, just how much gray, which is representing the impervious surface in this area. But then we look at walkability and green space access. So we're mapping where the existing trails and sidewalks are, and those parks in natural areas and how well they're connected. We're looking at land ownership and how important that is, of course, to understanding the potential for redevelopment and certainly the role that the private sector plays in any kind of planning process. Mapping traffic volumes, property values, age of structures, utility zoning. There's even a few more that we've also mapped on here, but for purposes of just brevity, we haven't going through all of those. Just to illustrate some of the ways in which we're trying to use this information, I'm going to pick on the traffic volumes one, for example. So what we did here is what you see on this map, the numbers that are kind of aligned in black that are along the roadways. Those are the most recent, what we'd say average annual daily traffic. So it's the average number of vehicles per day, in essence, that are traveling along these key roadways in the study area. But then we did also look back to the traffic volumes in 2000 and actually kind of mapped here the change in the traffic volumes along some of these roadways over that. In most cases, it's a 17-year period. Sometimes it's a 16-year period. And you can see, for example, when we look at County Road D just north of Maplewood or just west of Maplewood Mall, those roadways have seen a pretty dramatic decline over the last 15 or so years in the volume of traffic. White Bear Avenue has seen a bit of a drop, parts of Beam Avenue as well. Due to the residential development that's occurred in the northwest part of the study area, we've seen County Road D on the west area has actually increased quite a bit in terms of its traffic volume. So, and then overall thinking about sort of regionally, is there an impact on just the general amount of traffic that's been on our nearby interstate system? So 694 over that period has seen probably a 5% increase, which is probably somewhat consistent with the overall increase in transportation and traffic volumes in that time. So you can kind of see how this dynamic sort of plays out at that local level, or the very, very local level, almost down to that property level. So these are the ways in which we're really trying to understand how this information is valuable.
I think this is really interesting. I don't think we've seen this slide before.
No, I don't think so.
The one on where it's down 41% over by the Metro Transit Center. I mean, it makes you wonder if the transit center makes a difference in lessening the traffic, because it should, right? I mean, theoretically, if people are taking buses in and buses out as opposed to driving in and out. But it's hard it's hard to track all of that, I suppose, and the differences, like how many people in a bus could be how many people in cars, and do
Yeah,
a translation or something like that.
That's a really good question, because you'd see cars come at a point in the morning and a point in the evening using but they're not coming in and out at going to the businesses per se, because then they're
Right.
taking the buses elsewhere. My guess is that Birch Run Station has had a couple of fairly significant vacancies for a number of years now. But if we
Yes.
went back to 2000, it was probably pretty full.
Okay.
So that's probably by and large my best guess is to the drop
vacancies
in
are-
that one as well.
Yeah, are affecting that.
Because the traffic along that roadway is clearly very, very sensitive to what's going on at the adjacent commercial
Right,
businesses. So,
right. So the Herbergers and different things that have happened. Right. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Interesting.
So that's some of the other background research. I also want to go over some case studies, and for those that were at the first working group meeting, I went over this particular one, but I have a couple new ones as well. So we looked at Southdale. So this is a local example of another neighborhood that's anchored by a major enclosed shopping mall. And what we've kind of mapped out here, this is kind of an aerial view of the Southdale area, sort of looking north. I'm going to first of all draw your attention to the big square that Southdale's in the middle of. All four corners of that big super block have been developed now within the last 4 to 5 years. So it's an interesting sort of thing that's been happening with Southdale. And it's been in a variety of uses. So we've got restaurant uses in one corner, we have lodging in another corner, we have a home furnishing store in another corner, and we have a high-rise 10-story apartment multifamily building in another corner. So it's a multi-use changes there. And then there's within the mall itself, former JCPenney's department store. They actually demolished the department store structure itself, and they're now rebuilding what I would say is probably a sort of a super healthcare facility. Lifetime Fitness is going in with a flagship development there. I think the building itself might be slightly smaller than the old JCPenney store, but it's pretty similar in size and the footprint. And in Hennepin County, they've actually moved some of their government services from one part of the neighborhood now up into the mall itself. So you're seeing the mall sort of branch out and not just do traditional retail. They're actually incorporating health, wellness, and government services as well. So that's the story about the mall in the block itself. But then there's other interesting things that's been happening in the adjacent nearby neighborhood as well. So all the yellow areas that show up on here are recent or under construction or in imminent multifamily developments. So there's been a fair amount of new development happening on the housing side. In some cases, replacing old commercial properties. Some cases filling in a parking lot as well. So all told, this is probably somewhere around 1,600 units of new housing that's going in there. And then on the public sector side, some things that have been happening along France Avenue. They've looked at all the major intersections, and they've done a fair amount of crosswalk improvements to really enhance the pedestrian safety crossing France Avenue and it's in the crossroads. They've also, along some of the lower volume streets, they've built roundabouts to kind of help with traffic safety and so forth. And then there's a pedestrian promenade that actually stretches from Southdale to the south about a half a mile to some other amenity areas in the area that are just off this map. And that's really intended to kind of connect a lot of these uses in sort of a more enhanced a way. So now we're looking at a fair amount of public as well as private investment that's been happening in this area. And I do want to be certainly mindful and clear here that Edina and the Southwest Metro is not exactly the same context as we're talking about Maplewood in the Northeast Metro. But I just want to bring attention to the multitude of ways in which they are seeing all the different changes. This is not just simply a go retail. It's not that anymore. It is a different things. And there's been some different strategies that are employed here about how this change has been happening. So.
Well, just to comment on that, so we spent Thanksgiving sort of over by the Shake Shack, back behind that neighborhood over in there, and then over on that, if you go further, I think that's north, it's all the healthcare stuff, right?
Yep.
It's all the Fairview. I mean, it's a huge medical complex, so it is similar for that, and that drives, we also had a relative that was in there for quite a while, and so that, I mean, it does have a lot of similarities between healthcare and retail.
Yeah, with those two anchor uses going on in that area,
Yeah.
very much so. And there's a library I think in the area as well. So yeah. But that's the local example. I've got a couple others that are from other places in the country that illustrate some other treatments to enclosed shopping malls in the areas that they anchor. So in Lakewood, Colorado, which is just west of Denver, there was, I forget what the original name of this mall, that's the image on the top, that was built in the mid-'60s. It was 1.4 million square feet of space. By the late 90s, its occupancy was really low, I think under 30%, and mall ownership at that time, I think, worked with the city of Lakewood and said, what could be done here? Is there a new vision for this? Because clearly this 60s era mall just wasn't satisfying market need. And so over the span of a number of years, I think starting in the mid-2000s, they basically cleared out the whole mall. They knocked it all down, reimagined a new neighborhood from scratch. Retail was still an anchor to this development, so this area still has about 800,000 square feet of what was newly built retail space to replace the old retail. But they introduced a lot more housing and offices, and they basically created a number of new blocks. So they built new public rights-of-way and things like that. And you can see on the aerial on the bottom how much kind of just the dynamic. You can still see that there's surface parking in certain areas serving some of these other major retail uses, but there clearly is much more of a different pattern. Just the development pattern is quite a bit different. You don't have one giant building in the middle surrounded by parking. You've got more smaller buildings laid out on an actual grid network, and parking is more sort of strategically incorporated. It took roughly a 10-year build-out to get to the development that you see on that image on the bottom. So. Another example from Fort Worth, Texas, is a situation where another sort of regional mall that in the mid-2000s found itself at about 15% occupancy, and new ownership came in, bought it up, and they really looked at the sort of the demographic changes that were happening in the communities sort of surrounding this mall, and said that there was an opportunity there, and they targeted what is predominantly a Latino population through rebranding of the mall, renovation of specific parts of the mall, a lot of new programming. So you can see some of these images, how they've been kind of conjuring up all manner of different events to happen both inside and in the parking lots around the mall itself. They've incorporated within the mall a lot more common areas to facilitate families to be able to just congregate and kind of make kind of a day's event of it. And they've instituted some other sort of smaller festival scale shopping or business opportunities within the mall itself. So it's not all just simply long-term lease opportunities. And they did end up by 2008, within a few years, got the occupancy back up to 90%, and they're like at 100% today. So this is an example of not necessarily scraping your mall clean. It really is understanding where there might be new opportunities and doing strategic renovations and rebranding and repositioning and programming of the mall itself and those what would be public spaces within the mall. So this is just another approach and strategy of what others have been doing. So So that's the kind of the additional background research we've been doing, and now I want to talk about some of the engagement that we've been doing so far. Really back in August, when not long after we were initiated by the city to start the work, there was a open house that was held at the library. About 80 people attended. And we had some boards up there just kind of informing folks of the basics of the project and that we were just getting going on this, but we did do a mapping exercise. One of the things that we asked folks that came to the open house was, well, what is your favorite place or thing in the North End? And we had them write them down on a comment card, and then we had them place a sticker on the map if there was a place located thing. And that's the green dots that you see on this map. So we had, a number of people identified the library as a favorite place. Folks mentioned just the presence of the retail and all the services that are concentrated in the North End is really just a favorite thing about it. The availability of healthcare. Folks mentioned the parks and trails, the availability of housing in this area as well, and someone even mentioned the quality of the public realm. So that was sort of the favorite place or thing in the North End. We asked a second question, which is a little bit more sort of future-minded, which was, what is your big wish for the North End? And that ended up being mapped as these red dots. And you can see here a lot of folks talked about, revitalizing the mall with other uses. That was the top sort of vote getter when we looked at that. But a lot of folks also mentioned community park with more facilities. Recognizing that there is the open space there today, but they wanted to see that with more facilities, for example. And I don't want to go through each one of these, but you can see folks mentioned a number of different things about their big wish for the future. So that was, sort of an early form of our engagement. We also, on the project website, have a portal that's been set up. It's called Social Pinpoint. Folks can actually go in there and have an interactive process where there's a map that's there now, and they can put pins on the map, virtual pins, and make comments about what they would like to see for the future of this area. This is interactive enough that as we move through the process, we'll be able to do different types of things for folks who come to this portal. So we can do like brief visual surveys. We can do, a variety of different things that we're actually kind of looking forward to kind of exploring all the ways that we can actually use this tool. It's kind of a cool tool. But we've got some quotes here from folks who've entered in and have shared with us their thoughts. I'll give you a recap of the working group that we kicked off with their first meeting roughly a month ago. And we kind of went through and did a lot of logistics for them since it was the kickoff, but we did do an exercise very similar to what was done at the open house, where we were asking folks to help us kind of identify some key issues. So we asked them about strengths and opportunities within the study area, as well as any challenges or concerns or issues. And we kind of took those comments and sorted them down by sort of type. That's these categories on the left-hand side. And whether things were transportation or location related, whether it was related to development potential, whether it was the types of industry or business that were present. And we don't, I'm not going to go through specific comments here, but what I want to use this to note is that the results of all this are up on the project website. So they're available not only for the working group members, but everyone in the public that goes to the project website, and they can get the detail on all the comments that we've received to date. So. And the other exercise we did with the group was sort of mapping needed changes for in the study area. And actually, we put together a composite. We broke the working group up into 4 separate groups so that they could work pretty closely in a small group. And we actually put all those together into this map, kind of summarized those comments, noting a lot of the pedestrian connections that were needed within the study area. People were recommending new uses for the mall, so we're trying to document that. We identified several people noted a need for a hotel. Folks talked about ways in which to better link the assets, whether it was the hospital to the mall or parks that were not only within but nearby to the study area, linking those uses, how to better leverage the existing assets such as the hospital and the parks. And people really got into, hey, developing on empty parking lots and what sort of ideas around that. So this map is, as I said, it's really kind of a composite of 4 different maps that were put together for that exercise. And again, that's all part of the comments that we received, and it's available online as well. And commercial uses are certainly a really important part of the North End. And so one of our project team that's been working with us is Ling Becker. She's dedicated to helping us focus on business outreach. So she's been really instrumental in securing folks to be on the working group that represent businesses. She's been doing a lot of ongoing coordination with the St. Paul Area Chamber as well as the White Bear Area Chamber, and helping us with the Rush Line BRT planning and coordination with that. So we've been creating specific tools targeted to the business community, such as leave behind materials. We've been tailoring online forms and surveys for them. And we've been actually actively, Ling right now is compiling a list of businesses who actually really want to stay informed. If they're not on the working group, how can they kind of track this whole process and be involved in that? So we're doing that targeted outreach. And I do want to make a plug. We do have an online survey that is up on the project website right now. It's tailored to businesses, but really anyone can take that survey, and it makes complete sense. And we activated it recently. We've now been advertising it and promoting it through the city's Facebook page, and we're looking at other strategies to advertise it as well. So I encourage you. You are all certainly welcome to go to the project website and check out the survey. So I'll wrap up here with next steps. So we've got Wednesday, 2 nights. We're going to convene the second working group meeting, number 2. We're inviting Ramsey County is going to come and do an overview of where we are in the Rush Line planning process. We're also going to do a visual preference survey. So people can get a sense as to what sort of developments and other sort of public treatments and public realm investments and things like that are, what they like more versus other types. So we can get a sense on that. And we'll be going through a goal setting exercise too, as well as part of the working group on Wednesday night. That's the working group meeting. That's the next specific meeting that we have set up for this process. But as I was mentioning, with working and coordinating with Ling Becker, we're going to be continuing to do business and community outreach through early December in this early phase of it. And then we're going to start to kind of come up with some preliminary concepts. The project team's going to come back and spend the holiday period working on all of this. And then in January, we're going to start to roll out some of these different concepts, first to the working group, and then ultimately to the public in our different channels in which to engage them as well. So that's questions.
We did have Councilmember Smith has had his light on first. I know it's already gone off, but Councilmember Smith, I want to call on you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Demi. This was a really great presentation. I think, excuse me, where I get concerned with this and where I feel like this is going to really start to get difficult is that we don't own the mall.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of good activity happening in that general area, but we have a giant black hole in the middle of it. And, the examples you gave were great. Southdale is owned by Simon Properties. Mm-hmm. Ridgedale is owned by now CB Richard Ellis. It was General Growth Properties. The one in Colorado you talked about was owned by Starwood Capital, who used to own Sheraton. These are titans of real estate innovation and development. These are people who are committed to figuring out ways to make properties work and to grow the value of those properties. I have yet to see anything from the Maplewood Mall management about how they're going to do, how they're going to save that place. It's been a giant sucking sound coming from the north end. And we can't make them do it. We can stand ready to help. We can stand ready to support them. But at some point, they're going to have to do something and have a plan and have a strategy. And they're a private entity. And I think that's where my frustration with this entire effort is coming from, because I feel like there's a lot of people doing a lot of great stuff up there. We have development occurring already despite them all. And, traffic is down, but there are some businesses that are doing well there. There's some that probably are not going to do well there shortly. Some in the mall, some not in the mall. And with those that have more individualized owners, or even in some cases local owners, I feel pretty confident we'll be able to work with them. But for such a huge property that seems to be in getting close to a crisis level of vacancy and traffic, they just don't seem to be that worried about it. So I realize this was more of a pontification than a question, but I guess my question is from your perspective, what you've seen so far, is there anything that maybe I'm not seeing or that could make me feel better about this process, or is
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you that, when you're thinking about an area in which private landowners, really are, a very, very important stakeholder, unmotivated property owners are, they are a huge, huge barrier. Certainly, there are little things you can do as a community to try to motivate your property owners. Obviously, talking to them, getting them engaged in a process like this, certainly vital. I would say if you know for a fact that this is going to be a property owner that just won't really seize or create any, opportunity for themselves, then a plan like this might be more for the next owner of that property than the current owner.
Absolutely, and I don't know that for a fact, and I think this is probably my first step into the public shaming process of this. I don't know if that's the best way to go about it or not, but I mean, I do feel like at some point, this conversation needs to get really serious. And as a council person myself, I am ready to have a pretty serious conversation with them about how we might be able to help turn that property around. But I can't just talk to the wall.
Yeah, I just asked the city manager Coleman. I mean, that's really within our realm. We should try to make that happen if we can. And, I have to just to say, and not to interrupt because I want you to finish, but I am hearing also, rumors from different owners there about different things, and it's hard to know what's true. I did run into Jen herself, though, on Halloween, and she seems to think, it was very crowded in the parking lot. They had that special event, that things are okay. So it's, I think if we can get on top of, at least for the council, or a meeting or something, so we hear it directly, I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah, and that almost makes it more troubling to me that one day that they had a special event, there's traffic, and that seems to be okay. Go there any other day, and that's been the sort of thing I've been hearing from them, is that, oh, everything's great. No, it's not. And, it's eventually going to get to the point where it's unsalvageable, and that's what scares the heck out of me. Yeah. And I think it's time that we get a little more heavy-handed with them.
Yeah, hard to know what their business model is, right?
Right.
If it's intentional, perhaps. But Councilmember Juneman.
Yes, thank you. I have to kind of agree with Councilmember Smith, and their track record isn't good. It took them until they got bopped over the head with everybody else had remodeled, and they decided to remodel Maplewood Mall. So I don't really know what their intent is. Perhaps no one does, but it does sometimes look like they don't really give a rat. And I don't know how we go about telling them that that's not okay, but we have to have some kind of a communication that says, no, if you want to run one into the ground, find one in some other community that wants it to run into the ground. We're doing this study, we're enthused, we have people who would like to see some change. You too could benefit from this, but I just think we need to maybe take out a large hat pin and go from behind. But something has to happen where they indicate at least some acknowledgement that they know we're concerned and maybe we could work together. The other thing that concerns me, and I think part of this will start to shake down as we go forward in the engagement process and you have some actual models. But I get the distinct feeling from a certain number of people anyway that what they want is the mall fixed. In other words, put it back the way it was so we can just go to the mall and shop. And it's like, no, that isn't what this North End plan is about, because in case you haven't noticed, malls aren't doing too well doing that. But I do think there's a certain segment of the population that wants that. And the other part is, when you say, well, we need people around to make businesses thrive, people get kind of like red centers in their eyeballs going, no, I don't want any more of that housing stuff. It's like, well, your house, somebody thought about your house 25 years ago or 35 years ago or whatever. They didn't want you either. But we have to kind of try and sell the fact that this community doesn't thrive if we don't have housing. And that's a reality check. And I think, from what I can tell anyway, that both of the new things that have opened up in that northwest corner are doing very well and renting or leasing very rapidly. So I don't think the developers there were all wet. They knew what they were doing. And I think we have to convince people who have lived here or live in their own homes who think that's the only way to live, that it isn't the only way to live, and there are other people who don't want to do that, so that we can start to get the word out that, yes, multiple kinds of ways to live is how a community thrives. And I think we have a certain segment of the population that wants us to fix it and let them drive there and don't put anything else up there. And that's probably not the way it's going to go. So I think we need to start educating as to the need and the fact that their tax base depends on it. Sometimes that's where you have to go with people. That, this is a thriving community with a good tax base if we help keep it that way. And so I think that's something we have to let people know.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Agreed.
So, Councilmember Zhang, I am going to call on you because you're like, if you have some comments.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things. I think and the education piece of it, if we're looking to, I think we want to promote, an understanding of some of the goals that we're trying to reach to, and she touched a bit about, mixed use of the property there, and not necessarily like mixed use housing, because people get sort of the picture that a certain type of housing gets put on there. And so I was just gonna say something similar to what she said, but on another piece, do you have, I don't know, a little bit more insight on the LeGrand Plaza in Fort Worth? And I think on here, one of the goals or one of the interests of the working group was, highlight the ethnic communities in the area.
Yeah.
And I know there are many new, ethnic businesses that are opening up here in Maplewood and the surrounding areas around Maplewood, and maybe you can touch a bit more on, new ownership targeting, like the Latino market down in LeGrand Plaza. Yeah,
That's
that
a
was
great
a lot.
idea, right.
That was actually a
Yes.
long request, but
Yeah, we can certainly dig a little bit more into that project. As to what some of their strategies were. Clearly, by the rapid turnaround of that mall, was evidence of how there was this market that was just underserved, and that the old mall ownership clearly was operating on an old model and didn't understand and recognize that there was this underserved market. And when new ownership came in and said, this is underserved, I think we can create a product here, and lo and behold, they saw the absorption of vacant space just rapidly happen, and became an important community destination. We can try to do a little bit more digging to the backstory behind that and how that might be relevant for Maplewood. And it's in essence, I'm getting to your question then, right? Is that okay?
I think that's a great idea. We are about out of time. Anything else? Thank you for your time. Thank you for presenting what's happened so far, and thank you for listening to the concerns of the council. And council members, I think we're all on the committee, so if you can come Wednesday night, make sure you can come, because it's really interesting to be there with the participants. And we are going to, so thank you, and we are going to adjourn, and we will reconvene at 7:05. Thank you.